Hello and welcome to our podcast named Detours. This podcast embraces the unexpected twists and turns that shapes the journeys of our lives that God sends us down. I'm your host and fellow traveler, Mike. I'm here with my beautiful wife, Deb, and we invite you to join us on this exploration of uncharted territories we encounter along the way. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode. Hello everyone and welcome to Detours. This is episode number 3. We have made it to the big time here. Our third episode ever. Thank you so much for joining us. As you heard in the intro, I'm here with my beautiful wife, Deb.
Hi guys.
Great for us to be here. We are ready to go. We have practiced. We've gone through all the motions and we are ready to spread our wisdom to all of you out there. Don't make the same mistakes that we have. So we're going to share a lot of those mistakes with you guys today.
Yes, that's true.
That's true. We just pray that we can shorten your learning curve when you go through the same things that we did. But last episode, Deb, you were brave enough to give us some of your testimony, which included having a child in your teenage years and separating from the father of the child and then going through 2 failed marriages. And the second marriage, you got saved towards the end of it.
Right.
And that's where we kind of left off, was you going into your single life, if you will. So what the rest of this season is kind of dedicated to how you deal with life's detours. So what should today's topic be for this podcast?
I think we should really talk about the grief process. I know that people think of grief as grieving a person, but you have to grieve your losses.
Yeah, before you, I never even thought of that. I would have thought grieving. I had a parent that died, or I had a brother or sister or relative or something like that died. That's what I would grieve. But when I met you, you do a lot of talking about grieving things, what I would describe as things. How did you get introduced to grieving something that's not a person? What is that? Where did that come from?
Well, I mean, that comes from years of therapy. I think that we hold on to stuff that is very painful because grieving is very uncomfortable, because it's a acknowledgement of a death of a dream, a death of a hope, a death of a marriage, and those things. Just like when you grieve a person, it's painful, and there's these ups and downs, and you're just like, I'd rather not do that. So that's why sometimes people don't associate grieving a thing or a person or a season as a viable option, because it's not pretty. It's very sticky, actually.
Yeah, especially if it's something that you're holding on to. And a lot of times you don't even realize you're holding on to certain things. You could have thought that you were over a person, over whatever it may be, and you realize when you start digging into it, or there are triggers in your life, that you're absolutely not over it.
Right.
So yeah, this is really kind of a healing of sorts. Would you say that?
I would say that. I think everyone that has unfortunately experienced a divorce needs to allow themselves to go through a grieving process and a healing so that they can move on and be whole. Not that a marriage makes you whole, but there is so much brokenness that comes from divorce that if you don't work, a few of those pain points out prior to moving into another relationship, if you ever get into another relationship, it can be devastating.
Yeah, and so what brought you, did something bring you to your knees to make you go, Deb, you need to heal?
Oh, for sure. Well, we're going to be honest on this podcast. That's the point, right? So I'm embarrassed to say, but it was a one-night stand that made me realize, oh my gosh, I am totally broken. I remember being newly divorced, and I was at my parents' house, and we would do Thursday night dinner, and I was, it was after dinner, I was plucking my mother's chin hairs, Italian girls, were a little hairy, right? And I'm telling her, I really want to do this single life the way Jesus wants me to, and I'm going to stay celibate. I'm not going to have sex until I get married again.
And what is Arlene? Is she baffled when she hears you say this?
She goes, how are you going to not have sex? Like, emphasizing on you, like, how are you going to do this? And I go, I don't know, Ma, I'm going to pray a lot. And, like, I don't think she had much confidence in me, but...
Sounds about right. Okay.
Okay. And that was the hardest part that's what was so devastating about this one night stand. I had gone through 5.5 years up until that point where I was practicing, diving into the Word of God, and I was trying to be single without having, there's a lot of desires that come up in your singleness. And unfortunately, I think I got a little prideful about, I was 5.5 years in. But I didn't really have anyone to process sexuality with. I don't think the church is super comfortable talking about sex and the struggles that come with that. And even when you attempt to date in the church, there are lots of Christians that don't practice celibacy. And it's just like, they can sing on a Sunday, I surrender all. And yet in the back of their head, they're like, yeah, I surrender everything but this. You can't have my sex life, God. And so I was pretty proud of myself. And I use the word proud because it really did become a beacon of pridefulness. And about 5.5 years in, I felt like, are you just holding out on me, God? Like, why? Why? Are you holding out?
And what's interesting is hearing you describe it. I don't know if any of our listeners, if you've ever heard pastors talk about how Satan is like a lion that wants to isolate you from your group. And that's when you're weakest, and that's when he can attack. That's when you go all in for Jesus, you can really become vulnerable going, why isn't anyone else as dedicated as I am? And you really are isolating yourself. And that's when pride, your biggest downfall is yourself. And that sounds like that's what happened to you.
Oh, for sure.
So keep going.
Okay, so I get to that point where I do feel like the enemy is putting that lie in my head. God's holding out. I don't doubt that God is good. I just think he's holding out on me. And, oh gosh, the dreaded Christmas party. Just don't even go to Christmas parties, people. But I wind up having a one-night stand with a coworker. And I remember when it was all said and done, he was like, gosh, you'd really like my girlfriend. And I was like, your girlfriend? I thought you broke up. Well, we got into a fight. So basically, he had talked to me the whole night as if he was, not attached to someone. So not only did I have this one night stand after 5.5 years of celibacy, but like this guy had a girlfriend. And I just felt filthy. I went home and I felt so filthy. Like, how did I get here? Was really what happened. And I remember the passage, God is faithful to provide a way of escape in our temptation. And when I went back and really looked at the evening, there were 3 clear opportunities for me to go, and I didn't. And I wasn't just sinning, I was in iniquity. Iniquity is, I know I'm sinning and I'm going to do it anyway. It's like the highest form of rebellion. And I think you have these choices in these detours in life. You're either, when you mess up big, you're either going to run from God and go, oh gosh, he's never going to forgive me, or you're going to run right to the cross.
And most people do run away.
Yes.
Because of shame, because
Yes.
of disappointment in themselves, setting a bar too high. You can insert all sorts of reasons or excuses depending on what your perspective is. But yeah, that is the absolute norm. And you have to talk yourself out of it. God he knew you were going to mess up.
Yeah.
As we all know.
Before we ever mess up, he knows.
Yeah.
And he died for that sin before I ever even committed it. And I remember getting home after that night, and I had this tile floor in my condo, and I threw myself on the kitchen floor and wept. And I knew that, First John 1:9 is, confess your sins, and God is faithful and just to forgive you your sins and cleanse you of all unrighteousness. And so I talked to a good friend who was not comfortable talking about sex, but I didn't know who else to tell. I had to confess it to somebody. And so I called her up and I said, I did this horrible thing and I just don't know if I can live with myself, and I don't even know how I got here, and I need help. And that was kind of the catalyst that drove me to go get help from a program. It was called Family Life Skills. It was a 30-week program. Another friend had taken it. And it takes you from, childhood to present, and shows you your family dysfunction and your patterns, and helps you cope with anger and just all kinds of things that are very practical on how to do life from a biblical worldview. And so I remember the first day sitting in that class, and everyone kind of was going around introducing themselves. What brought you here? And I was like, well, if I already confessed to one person, I might as well. And I said, hey, I messed up big. I feel like a failure, and I need help.
And put me in that room. Were people stunned that you said that? Were they open to it? What was the response in the room? Well, actually, even before that, life skills, where was this? Where was the actual class held?
The class was in it was in Tamarack, Florida. So if for people that don't live in that area, like greater Fort Lauderdale area, there's, a city called Tamarack.
But is this just in a community center or something?
It actually was in a church.
It was in a church,
yes.
Okay.
And there was 12 of us, and all walks of life. I mean,
Okay.
young, older, widowed, divorced, recovering addicts.
Gambit.
Yes.
Okay.
And I felt really comfortable because everybody had come from some sort of brokenness. That's why you're there. And God put me in this group with the woman who was the facilitator, and she was an Italian woman from Philly. And I'm like, Lord, you just knew, didn't you? I needed that, because she understood my family dynamic better than someone who didn't come from that culture. And no, the room was not shocked. No, and it was not judgmental. So that was good.
So you realize you need healing when you act out and you have this one night stand.
Right.
You start piecing things together.
Right.
And you realize you need some healing. So you talk to your friend. Mm-hmm. Your friend recommends this class, Life Skills.
Right.
What is the curriculum? Who taught it? Where did it come from? Give me kind of the high level, 30,000 foot views of what Life Skills is, because other people out there maybe, if they want to look for something similar, what kind of give me that high level view?
The high level view was it was a man by the name of Paul Heckstrom back in the early 80s who basically was sent to anger management because he was involved with domestic violence. Like, he abused his wife. And in the midst of this anger management, he didn't feel like he really got any help. And I think somehow he meets a Christian. I don't know the exact testimony, but he winds up getting saved and recognizes, like, wow, like my whole life I've been this person that is just despicable, and I need to help other people not walk down this road. And he develops a curriculum from a biblical worldview. And the 30,000 view is like, hey, your family of origins, there's some things that you learn about yourself that are either implied or inferred or shown to you. And from that, you typically have your belief system. Some of it's a false belief system, some of it's helpful, some of it's not. And that program helps you sort through those and gives you a practical application to how to handle some of the life challenges that you have.
And so in this class, part of the healing process, how do they start you down that road? What do they start you out with?
I mean, it's a while since I took the program, but I think you start off with how your brain functions. I mean, it was very scientific the first few classes, and then the next few classes were, I don't know that I have a really good grasp of how to remember, but I know that we did talk through some stages of grief, and you know, we talked about denial a lot, and that's really the first stage of grief. And I think a lot of people stay in denial for a long time.
Yeah, and going back to what we were talking about earlier, you do have to grieve when it's not a person.
Yeah.
When you don't, not necessarily when you lose a person. For myself, I obviously didn't go through a divorce, so I can't relate on that level, but I did lose a job. I did lose a job, and you absolutely need to grieve when something like that happens. So what did life skills, what did you learn? Start unpacking the grieving process for divorce, for losing a job, for any loss. Start unpacking that for me.
Well, just like when you lost a job, you know, you have this denial phase of like, I can't believe this is happening. Like this, I don't want to deal with the loss of a potential career path. I don't want to deal with the loss of hopes and dreams I put into this person that was my promise to love me forever. You know, so when you're getting divorced, that first like initial like you're dealing with the what could have been. The I promised that we would do life together every day forever, and now it's done. And you know that it's happened. You're not denying that it happened. You're actually denying whether you're in pain about it. That's typically what it is. No, I'm fine. I'm okay. And you can stay stuck in that because life has to go on. You have bills to pay. I had a teenage son. I had to make sure I had a roof over his head. I had also lost a job. So I had to be able to push through just to do life. So I stayed in that survival mode. So the denial that I was really in pain, I kind of muscled through that for a while before I really did anything about it.
Yeah, you can even deny sometimes life happens in seasons. There are seasons of reaping, there's seasons of sowing, spring, winter, fall, and summer in life. And you can even deny what season you're in. You know, you lose a job, you can sit there like I blamed everything except myself. I blamed my boss. I blamed all sorts of things, finances. The company was struggling a little bit, and so on and so forth. And I was in denial that any of it was my fault. But yet the reality was a big part of it was my fault. But not just that, but I was entering into a season of winter, and I had to come face to face with that reality of, hey, this is going to be a tough season. And I sat in that season for about 7 years.
Wow.
It took me 7 years. And that's when, I believe in the last episode I was talking about, that I felt like I was God's punching bag a little bit. And it's because I got saved right around that time. And then I entered into a 7-year season of winter.
Explain winter, where somebody who doesn't speak that kind of Christian language might go, well, what does that mean? It was just a hard year?
It was a hard probably year to year and a half where I lost everything. I lost my dog, I lost my job, I lost my girl,
You were country music.
I was right out of an Alan Jackson album, and all I was left with was a drum. I'm a musician, and all I had left was my drum and the Bible. And really, God took everything else away from me because he needed to teach me some things, including how to be patient, so on and so forth. And I was in that season. Yeah, I was in that season for quite some time. I was coasting. It felt like I was coasting for about 7 years. And I was, especially as like you said, it took you 5.5 years for your pride to kind of catch up with you. What I think people miss is Christianity it's a long race.
Yes.
Christianity is a marathon. It is not a sprint. There's a reason why when you turn on ESPN and they're running the Boston Marathon. At the start of the race, it is just a mass of humanity. And by the finish line, it's people trickling across, and most of the time
Exhausted.
they're completely exhausted. Sometimes they're propping each other up, and so on and so forth. I even heard a quote. It's so simple and so silly and yet so amazing, where they said, the problem with life is it's just so daily. and it really, Christianity can be a long race with days that are so same, that things like pride and so on and so forth can absolutely come in. You just start getting tired. The same as being on a treadmill, and let's translate years to miles. For you had run 5.5 miles and you started getting tired.
Yeah.
And it was roughly the same for me, where I started getting tired, but I was still in a season of winter, and God was still asking me, Mike, you got to hang on. Just hang on. You got another. He didn't tell me I had 1.5 miles to go.
I think if he tells us, we would probably be like, oh, whew, okay, but that's not what faith is.
That's it.
Going forward without knowing, and trusting that God is good in the process. And that's where you and I, we do have that kind of similarity, at least in this particular part of my history, was I think you're holding out on me, God.
Yeah.
And you were saying, I have a hard time thinking that you were good.
Yeah. And it was because he was taking his sweet time, and I was getting tired of running on that treadmill.
He's never in a rush.
I was tired of running on that treadmill. And so, I definitely had it within me where I was denying that. There was a part of me that was denying that God, I felt like God was good. I was not in that camp. I didn't register in my brain. So there was denial on who God was. There was denial on my roles and my responsibility in losing the job. There was denial everywhere. Absolutely.
Denial can be very seducing because it gives you this like false sense of I'm in control because I'm going to power through it. I'm going to bulldog through something. And I think those people, that have control issues, this is denial and anger tend to be those things where you feel like you have control when you really don't.
Yeah. So anger's step number 2,
yes.
right, in the process.
Yes.
And people can flutter back and forth between those two items.
Absolutely. Anger and a lot of the other stages of grief you vacillate back and forth. It's not I get to this step and then I go to the next one. Just like life, there's ups and downs and peaks and valleys. And there's an amazing quote I heard recently from C.S. Lewis that really resonated with me, and it was, I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her name. My grief. I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her real name was grief. And you're like, wow, that's true. We hold on to anger, but really what we're holding on to is this pain that we're not processing through.
Yeah, and what was interesting, you touched on it earlier, it was ripple effects, right? So for you, it wasn't just the denial and the anger of the divorce itself. It was the life you were trying to build together with Mike. It was your son can very easily be damaged when you go through a divorce. Now he's been exposed and he could potentially be vulnerable. Who knows what kind of wounding that can have. So you're not just denying, you're not just angry because of the divorce, but it is all those ripple effects of tossing that little stone in the puddle and all the effects that can have. You have to grieve all the effects.
That's the truth. It's not just I have to grieve the fact that we're divorced. There's consequences, and that falls along the same line when you get to forgiveness. Like, you're not just forgiving the act, you're forgiving the consequences that act had on your life. You're forgiving the ripple, and that's hard.
Yeah, and I think so many people get stuck here. You can sit.
for years.
Yeah, what was the statistic you had? It was something along the lines of the average person, when they get wounded, they're stuck.
Well, it's when someone experiences trauma, and you could certainly say that divorce can be traumatic, but all kinds of trauma, sexual abuse, violence, whatever it may be, it on average they're finding in studies that it takes about 11 years for people to seek treatment, and it's because it's really hard.
It's hard. Yeah, not just hard, but denial is easy.
Yes.
Denial is very easy. It's as simple as, no, I don't need help.
Right. Well,
Or
it's like
I
the
got
addict,
this.
right?
Yeah.
You have to first come out of denial before you can get any kind of help. I mean, it really is the first step to any kind of healing.
Yeah. First step in AA.
Yes.
My name is Mike Snyder, and I have a problem. I drink too much, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But it's always the first step. And I even have mentioned before, honesty is one of the only areas, maybe even the only area, where there is a side of the coin where you're more important from a certain perspective than God is. And let me unpack that, because I don't want that to be heard wrong. If I'm not honest with myself first, I can't be honest with God. And so you have to put yourself first in that, because if you don't and you're not honest with God, let me give you an example. If you get a job opportunity to go work somewhere and they are willing to pay you more money than the current job, you could pray and say, "Dear God, I want this job because I'm going to be giving back to the community." But in reality, the true motivation is you want more money. So now you're putting God in a really tough situation where, how does he answer that prayer? You're not being honest with yourself. And I don't want to be misheard here. At the end of the day, you don't even come close to comparing yourself to God, but you understand the perspective that I'm giving, where how do you have a conversation with God? If I came to approach you on something,
right,
and I said I wanted to do, X, Y, and Z, but I was not honest with you about all the different reasons.
Yeah, what's the motive?
Exactly. What's the motive? What's really going on here? You really have to be honest with yourself. And so many people, when they're stuck in denial, they're not being honest with themselves. And that's why you get stuck there, is you can't turn to God and go, "God, I have a problem."
Right.
And God will go, "Okay, now that you acknowledge that, we can get to work."
Yeah. And I think that's why we're always encouraged to be in the Word, because the Word is a mirror unto our souls. It reads us. It's living. And when you're into, let's say you're in Proverbs, there's so many things in Proverbs that just jump out at you and go, ooh. Like, I've been corrected by God through the book of Proverbs more times than I can count. So in order to get out of denial, you have to kind of see yourself through that biblical lens. And God will show you verses where he wants to correct you and move you. And I think that's one of the things that denial sometimes puts us in a point where we're like, yeah, I'm fine. I don't have to read my Bible. I'm good. It becomes the driving force in survival. In survival, really. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I've also heard you talking about how anger is really a secondary emotion.
Definitely.
It's almost the mask that people are putting on because of what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, because it's easier to put up an angry wall than it is to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is not viewed favorably in this culture and in lots of cultures. And so, unfortunately, we haven't really figured out that vulnerability is an immense act of courage. We look at it as it's weakness. Somebody's being vulnerable. They're being weak. And until we can shift that perspective, people aren't real prone to being vulnerable. But,
especially men.
Oh, yeah.
Especially men. That's one of the hard areas for men.
Yeah.
Hollywood and external pressures and all sorts of things have really made someone being brave enough to come forward with something frowned upon.
Yes.
And it's not healthy. Not healthy.
And if I can speak to my sisters out there and anyone that's listening that's a female, like, we want men to be more romantic and more sensitive and be able to talk through things, and why can't he just cry it out? And yet when that happens, we're uncomfortable with it and we don't know how to deal with their vulnerability. So we have to also do a better job of, you can't say I want this and then as soon as you get it, you don't manage it well. So that's something that I always hope to do with you. Like, if you get to a point where you need to just be vulnerable, I want to be tender in that, because I want you to know you're in a safe place with me to do that. I'm not judging you. I'm with you. I'm your teammate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, home needs to be a safe place.
For sure.
For sure. It's a team. So after anger comes bargaining. Now, this one, bargaining, as you and I have talked about your divorce, bargaining for you almost was wearing a mask of shame, right? The I could have, if I had only done something different.
I should.
I should. Okay.
Yes. And the should, and we've talked about this before, is anytime you should yourself, you're shaming yourself. It's, I should have done this, I should have behaved this way. And when you start that dialogue in your head, it immediately sets you in a shame cycle. And it's important that we speak to ourselves in a way that's very clear. There is no should. There is, I've done this and it yielded this result, and I don't like this result. So what can I do differently this time around? It's a more tender approach. And I think the bargaining was like, I really don't know if I understood, like, that I was bargaining with God, but maybe the celibacy was that bargaining in my head. If I do this right, you're going to bless me with this great husband down the road. And you don't walk through obedience to get something. You walk through obedience because God is awesome. And obedience is an act of worship, but it's also God's protection for you. Like, when you trust that God really knows best, the obedience is just a natural progression of, like, he's not holding out on me. He wants what's best for me. But I don't think that I knew that at that time. You know, I think if I had to call something in my walk a bargain, it was definitely in the area of the celibacy. That was probably the hardest act of self-control I've ever had to participate in, for me.
Yeah, and you know, if you've lost a job, or, you know, my parents, I had a brother that passed away at 9 months old. You better believe that they were bargaining with God. You know, my dad kept a diary the entire time that my brother was in the hospital, because he thought that when my brother was healed, he was going to tour the country telling the story about how his son was miraculously healed from this heart condition. And lo and behold, that wasn't the case. But when you have a sick child, especially as a man, like, there is part of me that absolutely wants to protect you, wants to protect a child. That is ingrained in me, right? I'm a provider and protector and so on and so forth. That sometimes the worst can be when you have a sick child and there is no choice. You cannot protect that child. You have to understand that child is in God's hands, and that can be very intimidating, can be very scary.
I'm sure.
You know, what's the saying? Faith isn't knowing what tomorrow holds, but knowing who holds tomorrow. You know, you can have all these signs, you know, put that on a sticky note and put it on your mirror in your bathroom. Doesn't make it any easier. You know, it's one of those things that you got to really pray through. And
this is the wrestling with God.
It is.
People go, what do you mean you wrestle with God? Isn't that disrespectful? And it's like, well, no, God wants you to have the opportunity to work through things with him. That's what a good relationship is, right? you work through and you wrestle through ideas and fears and sadness and why and all of those things. You wrestle those out with God.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You think of Jacob.
Yeah.
I think he walked the rest of his life with a limp, but he knew exactly who gave him the limp,
right,
and why he was limping. And he thought he was wrestling with a man. And I think God really appreciated his tenacity. And there's such a fine line when it comes to bargaining, because with my brother, when he passed away, the bargaining in our case didn't work.
Yeah.
And yet God is still good.
Yes.
So then comes the grieving process, right? Then comes
depression,
anger, depression. There's a whole wave of emotions, but at the end of the day, at my brother's funeral, the message that was preached, we said the theme of the message, it has to be peace. It has to be peace. So the verse that we chose was Colossians 3:15. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Because next to your salvation, right? Salvation comes through faith. Next to your salvation, having peace with God is the next greatest gift we will get this side of heaven. And so if you can substitute bargaining for God's perspective and having peace, and that takes time, your perspective on life will change drastically. That bargaining goes away and you go, okay, God, this was the path you chose and you are absolutely perfect. Yep. What am I missing?
Yeah, that's it. What don't I understand yet? And I don't want to repeat this pattern, so show me. Show me me is a very brave prayer, and it's not always pretty. But he will. He'll show you. And he can be very tender about it. Like, show you piece by piece. Oh, yeah, you got to deal with this, Deborah. You got to deal with that. This is not healed yet, daughter. And you're not going to be able to walk in the things I have for you until it is.
And it's interesting, being a musician, when you're learning to play an instrument or you're learning to play a song, your teacher, your instructor, whatever method you're using, most of the time they will start you, let's use a scale, for example, they'll start you with a very simple scale and they'll say, go home, practice it for a week, practice it for a month, and come back. When you come back and you show that you've practiced it, over time they will give you more and they'll make it more difficult. Because you're practicing and you're putting in the effort, and those things that used to be hard are becoming easier and easier. God's no different. He'll give you something. He will give you a burden. He will ask you to walk down a path of divorce that you don't want to go down. Right. He will ask you to go down a path of losing a child that you don't want to go down, because it's hard. But if you do, and you do it his way, and you can find peace, now all of a sudden you're very teachable, and that's what his goal is. He wants to turn you into an image of his son, Jesus Christ.
And I think you said something interesting about finding peace. I don't want anyone to get the impression that it's just, it's around the corner and I just need to find it. I think the effort is the seeking of God, that he provides the peace. It's the only thing that we need to do is press in, and peace washes over. And that doesn't mean every single time you're going to feel peaceful in prayer, but it's that seeking him that peace becomes a part of your life, because you really do get to see God in an intimate way, and that intimacy can feel like a hug. And I know there were many a times just weeping and feeling like God was right there with me, and he not just feeling, knowing that he was with me in that pain.
And that's something, we've mentioned just within the last few minutes, a word that's tricky especially for youth, the word feeling.
Oh, yes.
Right? So you had a radical transformation. And when you tell your story, you had pre-Jesus, you smoked cigarettes. As soon as you got saved, you were able to instantly, without problem, give them up. You went from drinking and going to the bar to not. It was such a radical transformation, and your son watched it. That now, fast forward all these years, he struggles sometimes in his search for Jesus because he doesn't necessarily feel something. Feeling like the Proverbs says, don't trust feelings. Don't trust your heart. Trust God. Trust Jesus.
Don't lean on your own understanding.
Exactly, because this younger generation, they love to feel something. They want the
experience.
They want to give to a charity or something along those lines, like GoFundMe. Part of the reason why that's succeeding so much is the younger generations can say, I'd love to give $5 to this. And when I see in a month or two that this person has gotten better, whatever it may be that they were donating to, it makes them feel good for just a few dollars. Feelings can be, they're fleeting. Yep. Dopamine alone causes so many feelings that are...
Not kidding.
You're building your house on sand and not on the rock, that you got to be careful with feelings.
I have a dear friend who is younger than me, and we talk often so that I can kind of give her some of my life experiences. Because like we said in the beginning, if it helps you not go through something and suffer, let me impart what I've learned. And I always say, feelings are not facts. They're not facts. Feelings are feelings. Facts are facts. And I think in our spiritual walk, even sometimes in worship, I didn't feel anything from that music. Well, is it about you or is it about worship? Are you there for a feeling? Are you there for who God is? And I had someone in my life early on in my walk with Jesus often tell me, don't trust your feelings. What does the Bible say about that? What does the Bible say about that? And she was always good to bring me back to the Word.
And you'll hear a lot nowadays, this is my truth.
Oh, I hate that, Michael. I hate it.
My truth is X, Y, and Z. That should count for nothing.
It implodes on itself.
So often it implodes on itself. It's not it's what is the truth.
Right.
Jesus says, I am the way, the truth. He is the only way.
Right. He is the plumb line of all truth. He is truth.
That's it. He is truth. Truth is God. God is truth. My truth means absolutely nothing to God. Means absolutely nothing. And I think, again, feelings, we put so much dependency on feelings that even, again, stage number 4 in all of this is depression. Again, that is just such complex feelings happening. It's tough. It's tough to navigate those waters because what do you trust?
Right.
What do you trust? And so, when I was going through my 7 years, wandering around what felt like the wilderness, there were days, there were weeks where I didn't shave. There were weeks where I didn't even go outside and go get the mail. And that literally had to become my goal for today is I am going to go downstairs and check the mail.
Yep.
Because that's one more step than I took yesterday.
I know.
But I had to celebrate that as a win. And that it can be...
Depression is real, and we don't want to just equate it to only feelings. Like, depression can be very biological. Sometimes it's an imbalance of your brain chemistry. And it is absolutely part of the process of grieving. I think you have to hit that stage because sometimes in the depression, there is a little bit of slowing down and self care. Like maybe you do need to sleep it off. Maybe you do need to stop barreling through life. And sometimes depression is that thing that helps us take a nap. I think often of Elijah. He has this incredible moment where he is dealing with the prophets of Baal, and he has this climactic moment where he basically shows up all these idols, and he has a big win for God. And everybody sees Jehovah, God, is the only God, and all these other false idols that were being worshipped in the culture are nothing. And he has this aha moment, and then he hits this peak, and then he drops into a deep depression because Jezebel, the queen, is like, I want you. I'm coming after you. And God, what does God do? Elijah flees, and God gives him a tree that he can sleep under, and he feeds him. He goes, get some rest. Get some rest. I have something for you, but right now, Elijah, you need to rest. And he had what would commonly be known as a depression. And God took care of him in that depression, let him rest, fed him, cared for him, and even gave him the reassurance, hey, there are 7,000 that have not bowed the knee to Baal. You are not alone, Elijah. Now rise up and go. I have something else for you. And I think, wow, like God just let him rest,
And he did have something else for him.
He did.
Fast forward several years after both of our times in the wilderness, if you will, and we're 3 years, a little over 3 years into a happy, healthy marriage. Had
Praise
we known,
God.
yeah, no kidding, right? He absolutely had something for him. God sees the potential in everybody, saved or not. God sees the full potential of every single person, and that's why he is able to love far beyond what you and I ever could, because he sees the full potential. Man, I see this person for who they are, and if they could just let go of this, stop being in denial, let's work on this anger, whatever it may be, he knows what we can turn into. He knows that full untapped potential. And I think that's where, so step number 4 is depression.
And then you have acceptance.
Acceptance is the 5th one. Okay.
Yes. And acceptance, it may take a long time to get to acceptance. Acceptance doesn't just follow after depression. Like, okay, I've done my depression now I'm ready to accept. It doesn't work like that. It takes time, and I think acceptance really can't happen until you hit forgiveness. In my experience, how can you accept something until you forgive it? And so what I'd love to do next episode is to really dive into forgiveness. And like I said earlier in this episode, you're not just forgiving the things that have happened, you're forgiving the ripple effect, the consequences. And it took me a long time to forgive. I wish I could, raise my Christian banner and said, I made it, I forgave real quick. I did not.
The deeper the wound, so many times, the longer it takes to forgive.
It really does.
You could have, if your child is taken from you, meaning abducted, and you need to forgive the person that took your little baby girl, how much time would you have to spend with God, and how much wrestling are you going to have to do to reach that point of forgiveness? That is not going to happen overnight. That is a marathon. No joke about it.
No kidding.
So the deeper this wound, the deeper the pain,
right,
you're going to have to spend time, and you're going to have to trust. And that can be a very scary thing. And there are questions all along the way. But I think Yeah, I think that would be wonderful. I know some of the things that we want to get into are kind of a little bit of myth busting, if you will, with forgiveness.
Yes.
Some of the things like forgiveness is blank and forgiveness is not blank. Those are
Yeah.
some of the things that we kind of want to talk through.
Yeah, because there's a lot of misconceptions about forgiveness. And one of them is I have to feel like I forgive. No, feelings are not facts. And I think that one, I got tripped up a long time on that. And I'd really like to dive into that next week.
Yeah, and I think you've even talked about you have a letter of forgiveness
I do.
that you, prior to us recording this episode, you said, I think I want to read that in episode 4 or 5, depending on how it breaks down. But give us just a little teaser of that.
It was a letter that I wrote to my ex-husband. And as a matter of fact, I wrote several letters of forgiveness through life skills that were never meant to be sent, so that I could process through. And it hits, this is what happened. This was the ripple effect. This is what your behavior did. This is what my behavior did. And today I choose a different path. And it's a really great structure when you're ready to forgive, to kind of process it out on paper. I think it's incredibly therapeutic to be able to do that and to be able to pour your heart out. Whether that letter ever gets sent or not is not the point. It's the process that God takes you through to really process the pain. And that's what you're doing. You're processing through the pain.
Well, that sounds like an amazing episode. That's what we have to look forward to. We will get to that letter either in the next one, time willing, but if not that one, definitely episode number 5. But yes, we thank you guys for everything. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, we appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you next time. And we wish you well.
See you later, guys.
Thanks for listening to Detours. For more content, you can find us on Spirit FM Radio, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Play, or on our website at detours.life. To view my writings or to contact me for public speaking engagements, visit my website at debmarsalisi.com.